it's about strengthening community. And so I'll touch on vital signs, but we also had, as I mentioned earlier, the Emergency Community Support Fund. We partnered with the federal government around the Investment Readiness Program. We have a gender equality pilot that we're running as well. And then what's really important for us, because a lot of our work is around long-term impact, is taking that long-term view. And this is some of the things I'm going to talk about a little bit more around impact investing, multi-year grants, how we collaborate, and the SDGs, or the Sustainable Development Goals. Oops, sorry, just lost my icon here. So what is a community foundation? We have three key roles here. We're primarily, our priority right for many is around financial assets, building our endowments and other funds as community foundations, which helps us leverage that opportunity to build our community assets through grants and community outreach, and our social assets. So what's our leadership role in a community? Our knowledge base. Every community foundation is independent, is a registered charity under the Canada Revenue Agency. Of the almost 200 community foundations, they are in small, rural, and urban centers. We are predominantly, while our largest urban center community foundations hold the bulk of our financial assets, the bulk of our membership is in small and rural communities across the country. All are run by a volunteer board of directors and are primarily geographic based. So when I say primarily, we have some community foundations that are geographic based, but also have a particular audience. So for the first time, a couple of years ago, we welcomed in the EU Community Foundation, which is established for the Cree First Nations in Quebec. We have the Unaweg Communities Foundation for Atlantic Canada, and then we have the Haida Gwaii Community Foundation on the West Coast. So dealing with a specific population. And then when you look at how we grant, we call ourselves often a 360-degree grant maker. We have a broad perspective of the community, but a bulk of it goes out in social services, where we look at, that's where the bulk of charities are in across the country, followed by health and wellness. That other is sort of a catch-all for where people don't know where to put other things, and for the first time this year, we're really drilling down that number when we're collecting our data with community foundations. So I mentioned earlier about the SDGs and vital signs. So this is where we talk about shifting the power and investing in our communities and accelerating impact. The UN Sustainable Development Goals are an important mandate for community foundations. What it really does is really helps us align our grant making. It helps us to figure out what are the priorities, how do we connect local to global action, how do we know that we are really making a difference in our grant making. And a lot of community foundations are using the Sustainable Development Goals within their vital signs reports. And if you're not familiar with vital signs, I encourage you to take a look at it on our website. But we have about 30 community foundations every year produce a report on well-being in our community and on a number of different indicators. So, and some are using this to work on a specific goal. So for example, a community foundation, the Toronto Foundation really decided to advance goal number 5, which is gender equality, set up a specific fund around the Toronto Foundation's Women's Trust Collective. Our colleagues on the West Coast, the Clayoquot Biosphere Trust, is really looking at life on the land and life in the water as some of their priorities. So what this really allows us to do is to really dive in deeper. It allows us to really become knowledge focused and knowledge based and leverage that knowledge. And that's one reason why community foundation or donors come to community foundations, because of the knowledge that we have. What's working well, what's not working well, where are the gaps in our community? The work around the SDGs and vital signs is part of a global network as well. So we are learning from our other colleagues. We really use this information to engage donors and foster collaboration. One of the things that when we talk about shifting the power, the importance of bringing donors along in that conversation about what's important in our community. And I'll go into that in a little more detail. And then it's also about, leaving no one behind. We truly do want to create communities where everyone belongs. And so for community foundations, that's a big task. How do we do this? And COVID was a perfect example for us to realize where the cracks were in our community, trying to partner with organizations we'd never heard of before, or were really working hard, but had problems accessing funding from community foundations. And so this has really opened our eyes. So let's talk about shifting the power and where do we go to from here? I reflected at the beginning about our national conference and the importance of having conversations around equity, about racial injustice and a sustainable economy. You heard, and you heard references to it yesterday as well. And so, as community foundations, we can't be the answer to all of this. We need partners, we need donors, we need community and corporate leaders to invest with us as we work towards shifting the power. So there's 3 things I want to share with you today. And maybe there'll be some more questions that come up as we emerge on a path of learning and change within our movement. And just touching on how community foundations are working toward a maximizing impact through their philanthropy. So one of the big conversations we're having right now is how do we as community foundations become more community-centric versus being donor-centric? So how do we engage donors in those difficult but necessary conversations? As I mentioned about vital signs, how do we leverage our knowledge to engage donors in a new way of investing in our community? But also, how can we be attractive for new donors, younger donors who are looking for immediate impact, who are maybe not as keen on the long view, but want to invest differently as a community foundation? And how can we find a balance between this? And so being less donor driven about the donors' wishes, but really creating a model that's grounded in equity and social justice, and how we leverage that in our conversations with donors. The second area is around how we invest. Community foundations are built on a traditional endowment model with traditional investments, bonds, equities, cash. We disperse, 3.5% back out in terms of granting, which I'll talk about. But how do we maximize returns in a volatile financial market? And how do we ensure that our traditional investment models are working for us, or do we need to think a little differently? We have a number of community foundations that are looking at and exploring impact investing. So incorporating the ESG lens to their selection of funds, dedicating a portion of their funds, of their endowments, to social or impact investing. How do we turn around and invest in community instead of investing in bonds and equity? So how do we invest around microloans? How do we invest around holding mortgages for affordable housing? Those types of things. Gender lens investing. How, can we provide a lens around corporations that do have a strong gender lens on their work to ensure there's equity, and of course, ethical funds. We have a number of community foundations that have moved 100% towards responsible investing. As I mentioned, Clackawanna Biosphere Trust, they are 100% in that area. Calgary is moving towards that. Winnipeg as well. There's also a challenge or a call to maybe looking at divesting some of our endowments. And so we hold so much capital. We, as I said, over $7 billion, and yet we only give out 3.5% of that. These are big conversations that we are having as community foundations. We have more and more donors that are interested in spending down their endowment over a number of years. And while it's not financial, I think this is just really as important as around how do we invest in leadership? We have an aging population of leaders, especially in rural Canada. And so how do we invest in bringing along new leaders and engaging them in the work that needs to be done? And what does that leadership look like? We've seen how, as a result of natural disasters, things like a pandemic, we are seeing a huge exit of leaders in our sector. You know, natural disasters, wood buffalo is a perfect example where I think it was about 60% of their not-for-profit sector leaders did not return to wood buffalo. And so it's really important that we ensure that there's a strong leadership base to continue the growth of our organizations. And finally, I want to talk about shifting practices in grant making, because I think this is where we can make so much impact and change here. And so, you know, when we talk about trust-based or participatory grant making, this is really about focusing the redistribution of power for a more equitable process. So right now, some of you may recall in the last budget, they're looking at CRA is going to start to undertake a review of the disbursement quota. So should we disperse more than 3.5%? It was 4.5%. They lowered it to 3.5% in response to, you know, the financial markets in 2008, 2009. But now, you know, the call to disperse more. What does that mean about potentially encroaching on capital if returns are not good? And also about funding non-qualified donees. Again, a huge gap that was shown. We've known about this for a long time, but it really came to the forefront during COVID and during our funding with the Emergency Community Support Fund, is that there are so many good organizations out there that are not-for-profits, grassroots, that don't need a charitable business number, but are doing critical work. And there are so many barriers for us to fund them, so many workarounds. And so how do we break down those barriers? How do we overcome that particular challenge in order for us to make this a more equitable process? You know, as community foundations, we need to be doing a lot of homework. We don't need to put the homework on those organizations that are applying to us for funding. That's our job. We need to explore funding the purpose of the organization versus projects. So how, you know, we can, rather than making an organization go through a lot of hoops around creating a project and, you know, working on a budget, can't we invest in an organization that we know is doing good work and let them just do that work without making up lots of grant application criteria? You know, a real push for foundations that can afford it is to do single year or multi-year funding versus single year funding. And of course, this whole approach around trust-based philanthropy is about being transparent. It's about being responsive. It's about receiving feedback. It's about offering support around beyond the check. And it's also about being accessible, oral applications, video applications, conversations over coffee. And again, during COVID, when we were doing, you know, we saw how some foundations really did that pivot so quickly and just said, just tell us what you need and we'll get it out to you, because they know they don't have the time to do this long process. We are seeing, as a result of the ECSF funding, community foundations now shortening their application time, turnaround time. We are seeing them condensing the application. We are seeing them collaborating with other funders to compile one single application process. So there's lots of things that are happening. There's a lot more that we can do. So bringing you back to this slide that I showed to you earlier, you know, that a community foundation are all these three roles, but so much more. We, you know, we are really trying to move away from organizations that are being primarily transactional to donor-focused and reactive, to one that provides transformational philanthropic opportunities for donors, to lead with impact, not just a list of giving opportunities, but how one can strategically invest in community and to rethink our investment, our granting and governance models in order to make this happen and to truly represent the communities in which we live. All this with that lens about being an organization where everyone truly belongs. We want people to see themselves in their community foundation, either as a volunteer, as a donor, or a grantee. We are really excited about these challenges and these changes and shifts in our work. This is hard work, there's no doubt. Undoing some of our work that is decades and decades old, but it's an exciting time for community foundations. People do want to see this shift and they're looking for us to lead. And I'm really excited to hear the stories from this afternoon that are going to come up that share how some of our colleagues, not only community foundations, but others are looking around making that shift. So Brady, I'll leave it there and turn it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was great. And I apologize for forgetting to click the record button again at the beginning. Very notorious for doing that. But anyway, so I'll take five-ish minutes now for a few questions, if there are any for Cindy. I know I certainly have some, but if anyone would like to unmute and ask a question or pop a question in the chat, or then feel free to do so, and I can make sure it's asked.
Cindy, one of the things we've been talking about is the respectively low number of community foundations in Atlantic Canada compared to other places in the country, Manitoba being, of course, one that gets cited as having a larger number. Do you have any thoughts on what some of the barriers might be to community foundation establishment or operations that are specific to Atlantic Canada from your more national viewpoint? And maybe this is a question that can kickstart some discussion through the day too.
I know, great question, Kelly. You know, I mean, when we look at population drives some of that, but you know, we have 4 province-wide, well, 5 province-wide or Atlantic-wide, province or Atlantic-wide community foundations. And I'm a real fan of that versus the creation of many small community foundations. So we talk about the 50 plus in Manitoba, which is terrific. But when you look at sustainability of those organizations, some of the challenges they're facing, and that huge number of community foundations was the result of the Thomas Sill Foundation, a private family foundation in Manitoba, creating matching dollars to start up a community foundation. And seriously, I've spent a lot of time on the road in Manitoba, and you go down the Trans-Canada, and they're in every single town. They even have overlapping geographic areas. Is that sustainable? Is it feasible? Is it productive? I'm not sure, to be honest. And in fact, in some cases, I don't think it is. And in Atlantic Canada, I mean, New Brunswick's the only province where we don't have a province-wide community foundation. There are some gaps, and we would like to see those gaps addressed over the coming years.
And I think it's interesting just to add to that as well that, I mean, like even in Nova Scotia, we have some members today from the Rural Communities Foundation of Nova Scotia. So to see sort of that almost like a thematic basis or service area that, you know, is included. And we'll hear from Harry Daley today, who's a staff with the Greater St. John Community Foundation, who has some insights about, you know, the fact that there is no community foundation of New Brunswick, and that there's not 50, which is, I think, like you said, there's what's the max you can have in a province before it gets sort of unsustainable, but there are, you know, several. So it's interesting to see the difference in that model.
Yeah, and as I said at the beginning, you know, our job is not to, or our goal is not to have one in every community, but to ensure every citizen has access to one. So the beauty of the Community Foundation of Nova Scotia and the Rural Communities Foundation of Nova Scotia is that nice synergy they have between the two of us to ensure that the whole province is well covered and people have access to that. Plus also have slightly different mandates too. So I think that's great.
I see a hand raised from Joni. If you want to unmute. Joni?
Yeah, actually realizing and hearing this discussion in Bombay, we actually had the first community foundation in Newfoundland and Labrador back in the 90s when the Bombay Cottage Hospital Heritage Corporation was formed. And we didn't have the capacity to maintain it, and another organization took it over. The Economic Development Board coordinator took it over, but the paperwork is what killed it in the short term. And I don't think probably the province or the coast was ready for it now, but it was definitely paperwork that killed it.
You know what, when I work with communities that are starting up a community foundation, Joan, I never underestimate the volume of work it takes to run a community foundation. Yeah.
Awesome. Any other questions for Cindy before we move on? Hearing none, what I'll do, and I think, Cindy, if you're around for the afternoon, then, you know, feel free to pop in when you can. If not, I'll pass on your contact information anyways, and we can be in touch afterward if there are follow-up questions or comments. But again, I want to thank you so much for your insights, and it's been great to hear from you and from Devika yesterday from the Environment Funders Canada as you've come out of your national events and summits. So it's great to bring those perspectives here to Atlantic Canada and now switch gears a bit and hear from some local initiatives and organizations that are doing some of that on the ground work. So again, thank you so much. And I will pass it over to Rosa.
Thank you so much, Brady, and thank you, Cindy, for the today's sessions. So my name is Rosa Chukaleska. I'm an assistant professor in the Environment and Sustainability program here at Granville campus, and I'm a member of the Atlantic PhiLab Hub as well. Having a little bit of connectivity difficulty today, so if at any point either my video or something else goes, please let me know because I probably won't notice, unfortunately. So I'm really delighted today to be moderating our panel discussion for this afternoon, which is about community investment and philanthropy. We have three wonderful speakers who are Joan Cranston from the Bombay Cottage Hospital Heritage Corporation, Ryan Gibson from the University of Guelph, and Susan Hirshberg from the Rural Communities Foundation of Nova Scotia. We have 45 minutes for ask each speaker about 10 minutes outlining their experience with community investment and philanthropy. We've also asked each of the panelists to consider two questions. How is their organization building community connections? And second, what is the role of innovation in their organization? And innovation can refer to fundraising, partnership building, and the focus of the organization itself. So we'll start with Joni. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Rosa. Rosa's the only person who can talk faster than me. So, and I'm gonna try and talk slowly because I always have so much to say. And but I want to thank you for the opportunity for speaking today. I've never spoken to this kind of a crowd before. I'm actually a physiotherapist, and I've done a lot of social economic development and social enterprise work with 2 heritage projects, but I haven't really gotten into this whole philanthropy side of things until I think Rosa kind of brought me into it as part of the research collective. So just quick background, I am a physiotherapist. I've lived and worked in this old cottage hospital in North Point, Newfoundland for over 30 years. And I worked in it when it was a hospital and then it closed, worked in the system, hated it, came back to the old cottage hospital, which now runs as a not-for-profit community corporation. And we recently went through one of those federal investment readiness program business planning processes. And the consultant who worked with us couldn't figure us out at all. But what he finally figured we were is a social enterprise incubator hub, because what we do is we're incubating the cottage hospital itself as a social enterprise, adaptively reusing this heritage building. But then we're also incubating other social enterprises. I'm very desperately trying to give birth to a daycare on the lower level right now, but there's a few little barriers, but we shall overcome. So I've been running the Cottage Hospital Heritage Corporation for over 20 years. And then I also started doing my actual real job, a physiotherapy clinic down the coast, which is down north towards St. Anthony. 2 hours north of here is a community called Portachois in the center of the Great Northern Peninsula. And I was working out of a doctor's office there, but we needed a new space, a new clinic space. And lo and behold, this beautiful heritage community building was for sale for $70,000, which is a very reasonable price considering it had been all upgraded with 400 electrical service. Anyway, so I did what I usually do. I got a group of people together and we formed a not-for-profit. We formed a working group and we recently incorporated as a not-for-profit community corporation, the Great Northern Peninsula Community Place Corporation. And then the thing that really strengthened the project was I got involved with people like Rosa, and I started with a nurse educator, and this research collective formed around the project, which kind of had a health focus. But how I got into this whole philanthropy racket is that through Rosa's work with the PhiLab, you know, we sort of thought this is a perfect opportunity to see we're going to need community support for the Portachois project. So how do we get that community support? What does it look like? And then actually we can do a case study comparison between the Cottage Hospital Heritage Corporation, which has a different type of community support, and I would say much more limited. And then this new project, which has just got incredible community support. So, so this leads into the sort of philanthropy part of it. And I looked at different definitions of philanthropy. I love the one that says it means literally love of mankind, because that's what we all do this for. And the one about philanthropy being more long-term and strategic and helping people over a number of years, focusing on helping people and solving their problems over the long term. So a much more empowering definition of philanthropy. We don't have some rich millionaire who's going to parachute in and give a bunch of money and save the community. The approach that we're taking with the Porter Schwab project, and which has worked wonderfully well for us so far, is that we're focusing on letting the community understand that what they're doing is investing in themselves, right? They're not giving money to a faraway charity, they're investing in themselves. So how does our organization build community connections? And this is a key to our success, I think. We have secret weapons in our board. I'm a physiotherapist, so I've treated all the people. I have personal individual connections with them. They can see the value of what I'm trying to build. They know what I'm talking about. My board of directors down there, the town manager is my chairperson. She's also on the Heritage Committee. My vice chair is the pharmacist, business owner, really helps people with their health. My secretary is a Stats Canada field worker. My treasurer, it works for the Family Resource Centre, heavily involved with the Church Aboriginal Women's Circle. Then I have a business owner, Wise Elders, one of our board members. I have the mayor, Lobster Fisherman Enterprise owner, is one of my board members. And the other secret weapon, our newest board member, is a strategic transformation specialist from Porter Schwab, worked away internationally, worked on Y2K and bank fraud, money laundering stuff, big strategist. She's on my board. So, and all these people are connected into the community. So what we did that was innovative, I think, is that I've never done this before. So that's innovative, making it up as you go along. That's innovative. But I also had an evidence base for what I was doing with Rosa and the PhiLab and the newsletters that come out through that. And Rosa got a student, Samantha Young, who I think you heard from yesterday, who did some research on the kind of the lay of the land and maybe the best approaches. So she said that the sort of social business model is a blended model, and that might be the best fit for what we wanted to do, and takes wants and needs into account. Builds in hope for growth in the community, and it's also a scalable model. So we're kind of following that model. And the importance of thank you. When you're making an ask, the importance of thank you can't be underestimated. So took all those lessons. There's another economic social enterprise model based out of Fogo Island, the place model. Natalie Slawinski's the researcher that's done a lot of research on that. Can't go into that right now. I also took a physio approach. So what we do as physios, we find the pain and we try to soothe it, find the ways to address it. So the pain was the lack of service in the community. Then we mobilize people, then we decided the next approach to this project to build the community support is to mobilize the community assets. Porter Schwab is a very well-off fishing community, so we needed to mobilize those assets. That builds strength in the community. And what we did through mobilizing the assets through a variety of ways was the community is definitely stronger now because they're investing in themselves, which leads to the increased level of function in physio terms, but in economic terms would be building community resilience. So how do we mobilize all those community assets? In a variety of ways: word of mouth conversations, phone calls, walking into stores, telling them what we're about, saying that I'll be back, I want to know how you can help. We understand it's hard times right now post-COVID, so I'm not going to ask you to give anything more than you can, but I want you to be part of what we're doing. So we'll ask you to give something. And everybody ended up giving something. Well, most, not all, a lot. And so we asked them to give what they could. Some businesses made donations of $500, $200, $100. We developed a sponsorship program. They thought it was crazy, starting with 1,000 for bronze, silver's 5, gold is 10, and platinum is 50. But we've now got 1 silver sponsor, Newfoundland Labrador Hydro, and 6 bronze sponsors, including Harbour Authority Lions Club, a grocery store, a paint shop, and another business. So then the small business donations, the sponsorships, and then, but we needed an event. We needed a way to get money out of fishermen, because you can't go to them at the beginning of the season. Okay, 2 minutes, I can do that. We can't go to them at the beginning of the season when they're spending all their money and they haven't yet got their revenue. So the mayor on our board, so what you need to do is get them together on a Saturday night at an event and find ways for them to spend their money. So we kind of took a Ducks Unlimited model of doing an auction. It started supposed to be a benefit concert, live music, turned into a live and silent auction, got everybody together, a great time. Even in COVID, we did it safely because we sat them in tables with their bubbles. There was a gala event, white tablecloths and tea lights on the table. We transformed the room with dollar store items, some of which were donated. And we got people together in the room for the first major event like this post-COVID, did it safely. We raised $10,700 there in one night. And plus we have the, over 11,000 in sponsors, about 5,000 in donations, and the town council is loaning us $70,000 interest-free to buy the building. So I'm just amazed at what just happened in Port au Choix over the last 2 weeks. I'm blown away. I don't know quite what we did, but thanks for the opportunity to reflect on what we did and maybe take a few lessons and hints and share them and see what you all think of it. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Joni, for that wonderful story. So what we're going to do is ask each speaker to speak for 10 minutes. We'll do Q&A at the end. So please think of questions, but hold on to them for the moment. Our next speaker is Ryan Gibson from the University of Guelph.
Thanks, Rosa, for that introduction. And Joni, wonderful to hear of the story that was taking place in your neck of the woods. I'm going to share my screen just because, not that I've got a whole bunch of content to share in slides, but I thought I'd share some lovely photographs in case your afternoon is starting to get a bit long on that front. You can look at these beautiful, beautiful photographs from across the country. So as Rosa mentioned, my name is Ryan Gibson. I am joining you this afternoon from Guelph, Ontario, which sits on the traditional territory of the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation. I work at the University of Guelph as the Liberal Professor of Regional Economic Development, which in itself is a really innovative initiative between credit union and a number of donors in Southwestern Ontario to create this opportunity, but that's a topic for another day. For the past number of years, I've been actively working with charities and philanthropic organizations throughout Canada, and particularly in Atlantic Canada, where I used to be living in Newfoundland, but also in Nova Scotia. And we've been working with community organizations to try to better understand the realities and the challenges of charities and philanthropic organizations to support their communities and their regions. At the end of the day, all of these organizations are focused around supporting long-term prosperity. And as Cindy highlighted some of the work that community foundations are doing, Joni highlighted some of the work that's taking place in her neck of the woods. This afternoon, I wanted to share some insights from some current research we have on the go, but also some community voices, maybe from outside the Atlantic region, with regards to those two questions that Rosa highlighted in terms of connections and in terms of innovations. So in terms of the research that we have on the go, we have a multi-year project that is working with communities throughout Canada in rural communities, I should say. And we have kind of three big focus areas that we're looking at. The first is how can place-based endowments be re-embedded into those rural communities? Because we've often thought of rural places as being maybe poor cousins to the urban areas. And so how do we think about collecting wealth through mechanisms that Cindy described, like endowments, so that they stay in that place where they were raised, so that they can be reinvested in local priorities and to support long-term planning. So we've been trying to figure out how does this work in a number of different communities. We're also keenly interested in understanding how public policy either facilitates, and I was very polite on the slide and didn't put hinder, but how public policy also hinders the ability for communities to take advantage of this endowment strategy to enhance their long-term prosperity. And finally, we're also interested in understanding how philanthropy and the ability to collect this wealth, to reutilize this wealth within their communities might actually change our understanding of how we do local economic and community development, because we're no longer thinking of small towns as being cash poor. They actually have, as Cindy alluded to, a large amount of financial resources at their discretion. And the question is, how might they use that, and how might that change the dynamic between governments and between our regions? So this research is ongoing, and we could chat a lot about it, but I know a number of my colleagues have shared some of their parts of this throughout the program yesterday. But we can talk at length of this, and happy to have another conversation if this is of interest for anybody on the call. But going back to the first question for this session. And I'm channeling my inner Jan Brady here, connections, connections, connections. And the philanthropic organizations we've been working with are guided by dedicated volunteers that are well embedded and well invested in their communities. And this strengthens the work that they're doing, ensuring that their activities make a difference to the communities that they are serving. What's important to recognize is that philanthropic organizations are one of many local and regional actors that are striving to enhance the long-term prosperity of their community. There are businesses, chambers of commerce, there are nonprofit organizations, faith-based communities, all that operate in the same geographical area that often have many similar or overlapping priorities. And so the question that often emerges and the challenge is, who's connecting all of these different actors together within the same physical space? And there are a number of challenges to this that you can well imagine that have already been noted by Joni and by Cindy. One is human resources. Often philanthropic organizations have limited human resources in terms of staff. Many have no staff. And so then it becomes a responsibility of volunteers that are already doing a lot of work for these organizations. And so all of the good work that's happening sometimes can be limited by the lack of forums. That's the second challenge that often people have raised, is that there really isn't a table to sit at, or a proverbial table, to connect all of these different actors together. Because historically, they've often thought of themselves as being quite separate: economic development, business development, charitable and philanthropic development, and not necessarily saw a connection between them. But I think Cindy alluded to it really nicely, that community foundations are seeing themselves as a catalyst for change. And this is something that many philanthropic organizations are also looking towards, as are all of the other actors. So there is this opportunity to find ways to create forums and meaningful connections to bridge the multiple actors in these communities. There is also that potential we hear many times about overlap between philanthropic activities and the work of other groups and other organizations. And it's not that one is trying to steal the wind out of a sail of another, but rather just kind of serendipitously, they both identified a really good priority, both identified some strategies, but didn't realize the other was also doing the same work. There also a common thing that people and philanthropic organizations have passed along to us in this research is the potential for missed opportunities because of the lack of collaboration, where there are a series of activities that are ongoing that are complementary, but there was no opportunity to connect the dots. And one example that was presented was work that a nonprofit environmental group was doing with the local schools around increasing environmental education and water stewardship, and the local philanthropic organization saying, we actually have a fund dedicated to supporting environmental protection and stewardship activities, that if they had been more proactive, there could have been an opportunity to combine the two activities, or at least allowing one group to feed into the other group so that greater benefits could be gathered by those communities at the end of the day. So we've seen some examples of this collaboration taking place, where regional actors are coming together. One of my favorite examples that was shared is just simply around fundraising. And it was the fact that many groups are actually doing fundraising to the same audience at the same time. And it's not that they're trying to compete with the other organizations, but rather there was simply no communication around when those activities are taking place. So connections are absolutely a priority for moving forward. The other question that was posed was around innovative stories or innovative practices. And the amount of innovation that is taking place in the philanthropic sector absolutely surprises me and motivates me. I'm always shocked at how much is taking place. But the other thing that's really important for us to grapple with is that many communities often downplay their innovations. They often get missed. And so when you ask an organization if they're doing anything innovative, they often say, no, they're not. And it's not because they're not doing it, but rather the innovations that they're doing, they simply consider it as getting things done or the way they do things. And they don't see themselves as being an innovator or doing innovative things. And so we need to ensure that we don't miss these innovative practices, because they're incredibly important and they build a significant amount of momentum. In the last minute here that I've got, I want to share just one quick story of a group that embodies both the innovation and the connections. And that comes out of the Huron County in southwestern Ontario. This is a predominantly rural region. And in this region, they actually have no community foundation operating within the geographical area, although there are other regional foundations that do provide coverage. But in this particular region, they wanted to explore a partnership between economic development, the local government, and the philanthropic sector. And so they've created, or are creating, I should say, it's still in the process, an opportunity to build this relationship between the Community Futures Development Corporation, which in Atlantic Canada would be the Community Business Development Centers, the CBDCs, with the philanthropic sector and the local government, whereby they are looking at opportunities to provide training and capacity development supports for entrepreneurship and leadership development, bridging that into existing programs that exist within the Business Development Service Center to provide small grants and loans to support business expansion or new businesses to emerge, which ultimately are going to benefit the broader community by ensuring there are jobs and opportunities there. So it's a really innovative story that connects the philanthropic, the economic development, the local development to benefit the broader community. But I'm going to leave it at that. There's more information at that website if you're interested, but I look forward to both the upcoming presentation and any questions that people have.
Thank you very much, Ryan. That was much appreciated. Our third speaker is Susan Hirshberg from the Rural Communities Foundation of Nova Scotia. Susan, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. I'm hoping people can hear me. Brady, maybe if you can, just give me a thumbs up. It looks like you can. I'm coming to you today from Mackay, the unceded and this is my first time doing this kind of land acknowledgement, ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And actually, what I have been finding about land acknowledgements and my understanding of this whole process is, as I hear them, what it has done is really made me start to think about some very deep questions about exploitation, sustainability, the relationship between them, personal responsibility, reparations, genocide, all of those kinds of highly interconnected issues. And as many of you probably know by now, I am particularly interested in climate change. And what happened was in 2019, I approached the Rural Communities Foundation of Nova Scotia as a donor and asked if we could sort of create a fund, which we called the Community Sparks Fund, specifically to deal with rural communities projects on climate change. So we did a pilot in sort of the very end of 2019, and then of course right into COVID, where we had 7 youth projects that were funded. And just now kind of spent quite a bit of 2020 trying to figure out which directions we wanted to go and how we were going to do it. And the foundation has decided to very, very much expand that program and to make it not just youth-led projects, but also projects led by adults and other, intergenerational aspects. We do still have the youth projects, which we're funding as well. Now, the orientation of the Community Sparks Fund is towards small grants, and our maximum is $5,000 for adult-led grants and $2,000 for youth grants. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why we're doing that. I think the rest of this presentation, I'm actually going to combine the 2 questions that Rosa posed us of connecting with people and communities and also innovation, because for the Community Sparks Fund, they are absolutely like this. The fund itself, in trying to sort of figure out where my niche was, I had to look at my particular skills, and my particular skills are a little unusual. I was brought up as a scientist. I'm the daughter of physicists, and in fact, my mother actually was one of the scientists who was on the IPCC original climate change report in 2007, talking about climate change and what a huge issue it was. And so there's a lot of this work personally, which is sort of the legacy of my mother who died this year, to actually get things done on climate change. So one of the advantages that I have is working with climate change. There is a problem, and it's a very clear and exceedingly difficult problem. And again, as I mentioned yesterday, we don't know how to solve it. You cannot actually look at climate change and say, okay, well, we're just going to do these things and it's going to, everything's going to be okay. And you also know, if you know anything about climate change, that you absolutely have to take action. There are no excuses. There is no more time. It has to be done. And I think that that is something that is an advantage in a way, because there's more and more sort of folks out there who get that message and are willing to just say, okay, so now what are we going to do? And so part of our hope was to place the Rural Communities Foundation of Nova Scotia in a position so that when those other people start to realize, that, okay, I've got some money and I want to do something about climate change, who's doing something on climate change, that we actually have a program that could potentially be a source for those people to give us money. So what I've tried to do also is try to leverage the relatively small amount that my family was able to give into, a provincial program. And that means talking to anybody else I can find who might have some sort of interest in this. And one of the things that we've been doing is we've been making a lot of cross-sectorial sort of partnerships, because and part of my philosophy, from having worked in science and from having worked in the nonprofit world for a while, I later became an alternative healthcare practitioner. So Joan, I'll be approaching that too, but I have a very wide background. And what I know is that the way that people solve problems is by bringing together a whole bunch of different things and kind of smushing them together and see what happens. So see what emerges. And that whole concept of the emergent solutions is, I think, a really important one, because that allows you to be in a position where you don't actually know what you're going to make before it happens, but you can go with where momentum is. And that's sort of another really important aspect of, I think, our innovation, is that we don't have to convince anybody of anything. We just have to give people the opportunity to do the things that they really want to do. And there's a tremendous amount of power in that, because it means that you've already gotten motivators, and dealing with rural communities and people in rural communities, you're dealing with a whole bunch of individuals who have their specific talents, and they have their specific skill set, and they have their specific connections, and they have their specific relationships with other people in those communities. And if those people are motivated and given a little bit of support, they can do amazing things. So an awful lot of what I see the Community Sparks Foundation doing is sort of giving those individuals within the community enough of just like a little oomph to get them going. And so we're really about that space, which is, what I phrase it is the space between idea and action. So all kinds of people have ideas about what they might be able to do to actually help in this huge problem. But they just need that little bit of something to make it so that they're it's not just something that they're thinking about, but it's something that they're actually doing. So the more of those different kinds of people that we can activate, the more they can talk to each other and work off of each other, then you get a sort of a growing emergent solution-based space. And that is really important when you're dealing with a specific problem, that you need creativity, you need risk, you need innovation in order to solve. And so a lot of the way that we've structured the grants is to try to foster creativity, innovation, and risk-taking. And that is also a little, I think, unusual. So we've tried to make the applications low stress. That's one of the reasons that we have these sort of low amounts that we're giving to people. So it's not like, oh, I've got a $50,000 grant that I need to make sure, I do right. There is built into the culture the ability to fail the ability to have a project not work out and to learn something from it, to talk to other people about what did work out, what didn't work out. So that's also why, as part of our process, we're having sort of project showcases where we're hoping that the people who get the grants can get together and talk about, not just to other grant recipients, but to other members of the community, what they tried, how it worked, how it didn't work, what they could have done, and what they still want to do. So again, I think that close connection between the connections between people and innovation. And then I just did want to say one thing to I was thinking about Joan and talking that she was talking about being a physiotherapist. When I was an alternative healthcare practitioner, which I've just temporarily given up to work on climate change issues, we thought a great deal about healing. I was actually a Reiki practitioner, and a craniosacral therapist. So how does a person heal? It comes from within. It's not something that other people, actually can manage to tell somebody else how to heal. That healing process is often from holding space, from the therapist in the particular modalities that I practice, holding space for that body to heal itself. And so you can be in a position of not knowing what that person needs, but allowing them to hear their own voices from within themselves about what they need. And so I very explicitly had the approach that I was going to try to do that same thing with communities, to hold the space for them within the members of the community at large, and the community interacting with other communities to find their own solutions and to listen to their own voices. So when we talk about trust-based giving and philanthropy, I think that's right in there in that space of allowing these communities to come up with the projects that they need, to know that they're the people who are the experts inherently about what their community, what's going to work in their community. And then, trying to give them as much leeway as possible about how they do it. And then I'm not quite sure about my time. I thought I was keeping track of the time, but if somebody could give me
If you want to conclude your
okay,
session.
right. So, I think those are the main things. And also just knowing that every individual has something that is their piece that they can uniquely give to this very serious issue. So however it is, whatever it is, finding the way for those people to express that piece goes a lot further than just saying everybody needs to wear a sweater or whatever it is. Everybody needs to find that place where they feel valued and where they feel a part of the overall effort. And that's been really helpful.
Okay, thank you so much, Susan, and thank you to all three of our speakers. So we've reached the point of Q&A. We have about 10 or so minutes, and maybe I'll ask the audience first if they've got any questions. You're welcome to type your question into the chat or to turn on your microphone and ask your question.
I have a question if there are none other on the floor, and if there are any questions, like I said, like Rosa said, feel free to put them in the chat, and I can Rosa and I will make sure it is asked. But it's interesting to hear, the different, some of these buzzwords that are going around, like innovation and risk, and these kind of community leaders that are integral in some of these projects. And I'd be interested to hear more about what it means to be embedded in those communities and how that has supported the initiative. And maybe, I know, Joni, you spoke a bit about that already, but could you speak a bit more about what that means to be able to support those community leaders and what sometimes people call community champions, or these people who really are embedded in their local areas? Has that impacted the work that you've done in the region?
Yeah, and I actually don't like the term community champion, because that's someone who rides in on a white horse and they can ride away again. And then what are you left with? I call myself a community broker, and I'm a community research broker. I build the relationships between the researchers, the research collective, and the community. But I also do it in so many other ways. I just feel I have become, in both the communities, one of the people that you can go to if you want something done. And if I don't know who needs to do it, I can tell you who it is and hook you up. So I'm more like the connector, because I think leaders emerge in the community, and it's much better when it's when those leaders emerge from within, I think, rather than from without, because like Susan said, I think we have a lot in common in our approach, Susan, and maybe that comes from the health background, but the healing and the resilience, it comes from within. It's not imparted from without. So I think what we need to do is have people, brokers in the community, and you have to be there. You have to be in bed. You have to live there and work there and want to be there. And then you can identify the strengths in the community. And again, as healers, we help people build their strengths. So that's the way I work through that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I kind of think of my role a little bit as fascia in the body, you know, the bit that connects all the other kinds of different pieces. But I'm thinking too of you know, how to work with some of those amazing people who are in so many different communities. I'm thinking of Tahira Paul in Patladak First Nation, and she is the economic coordinator or economic development coordinator for the First Nation. And she has a couple of youth that she was mentoring who ended up doing 3 projects with us on you know, developing new protein sources and working with bees and having a bilingual cookbook in Mi'kmaq and English. And as a result of the grants that we gave her, they've managed to leverage another $250,000 of funding. They're dealing with food sustainability for the community. They're dealing with employment for the community. This is a community that really has taken control over kind of all aspects of dealing with climate change and understands, of course, that all these things are so very deeply related. And so it's been great to be able to, you know, just provide that little spark. And again, you know, I think that was the reason why I was hoping for that particular name for this fund, is the idea that if you provide a spark, then the whole kind of system can take on its own momentum and its own power. And that, you know, these very talented, creative, innovative people can actually get done what they want to do. So that's been very powerful.
Thank you both. We have a question in the chat which says, how do you think trust-based philanthropy looks specifically in the context of environmental?
I can go again, but I didn't know if Ryan wanted to say something.
No, go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, I think trust-based philanthropy is absolutely crucial, you know, for some of the reasons that we've mentioned before about who really is the expert. It's really the community members. But the other thing that I love about the trust-based philanthropy is that you can have 2 communities that are right next to each other. And the ideas of what is the thing that's going to help for climate change is based, of course, on the individual who lives in that community. So you can get completely different things in places that are just a few kilometers apart from each other. And then those people can talk to each other and they can, again, sort of leverage their own relationships. And if you are coming in and you say, okay, well, climate change means emissions reduction specifically, or something like that, then it is a very different process from allowing the community to define what it is that their own climate change work is, and allowing that creativity and exchange of ideas.
Thank you so much. Ryan, did you want to have a chance to respond to either this question or the previous
No, I think Joni and Susan had wonderful responses there, but I would just echo that I think trust-based philanthropy is not only important for the environmental action, but I think for all of the action that they're doing. Because without trust, it's a very difficult relationship to both build and to maintain.
Thank you so much. We have time for one more question. I have a whole set of them, so maybe I'll ask one of these. And what I'm really curious about is that we've heard, you know, from 2 community-based organizations who are doing really detailed place-based kind of work. And we've heard from Ryan, who's spoken about the role of university in gathering some of this information and transforming it. So I'm very curious to hear about the role of universities and research in general, either on the ground in one of your organizations or from Ryan's perspective of what it achieves in terms of working with, especially rural organizations.
I think the role is invaluable because it not only validates what we're doing, to me, research is about asking a question. So I might ask a question to my research collective. How do I do this? Well, somebody around the table is going to know the answer. They're going to have the evidence, and they're going to be able to connect me with a whole worldwide network of other researchers who may have answers and may be able to work together. And not only the academic researchers, but the grad students are gold. They are my gold because they help me do so many things like take meeting notes and create wonderful Excel spreadsheets. And so the university as a team, I think when we get a chance to work really well together, my research collective meetings are my most favorite meetings that I go to, besides my board meetings. But it's a wonderful collaboration, so much resources that can be brought directly in to help communities.
And I would just echo the comments that both Joan and Susan mentioned already, the metaphors. I think one was brokering and one was the fascia, using the biological metaphor. And I think universities are that. They're part of that larger kind of bigger ecosystem that can connect, but also I think universities are learning as much from communities in terms of what's actually happening on the ground. And speaking to kind of the comment that Cindy raised in her presentation is the ability to connect young, energetic, exciting, emerging leaders to practitioners that are on the ground, that are passionate, is an incredible opportunity that builds those relationships that hopefully are going to last well beyond a graduate student's time at a university and will continue to kind of build momentum, whatever it might look like or wherever it might look like. But I think there's a huge opportunity, and the engagement of communities advances the research, it advances the networking, it advances, I hope, all of the collective goals for everyone involved. And hopefully we're not a hindrance or a headache.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate universities. We're just now sort of beginning to work some interrelationships with the community, the Rural Communities Foundation and MyTax, which is the research arm. So we're working on how we can actually specifically approach the problem of climate change in Nova Scotia through all kinds of different students. We just had a grant call go out, and we got a couple of grant requests for a couple of PhD students who are doing amazing projects. So we're like, okay, maybe we can work that with MyTax and we can find the funding that way. Overall, too, I think that universities are a really crucial part of this whole sort of cross-sectorial partnerships that we're trying to form. Because again, you have so many young people who really do get it, who get the interaction between exploitation and sustainability, who get that there needs to be intersectionality, who get that there is no more time. So all of those things, and then to actually have some of those people out in communities and have that mutual exchange of ideas is I think, crucial. And, I personally would love to see universities in Nova Scotia think about the issue of climate change as perhaps forming a provincial curriculum with some of these rural students, so that those students can perhaps go back into their communities and engage in some additional projects.
Okay, thank you so much. Both of those responses and for this panel. So thank you to Joni, to Ryan, and to Susan for their contributions and their ideas. I'm going to send it back to Brady because I think we've got a coffee break coming up.
Yes, thank you so much, Rosa, for moderating, and for our panelists for being here and those who were participating. So, hello, everybody. So we're about 1 minute to the hour in Atlantic time, and I'm laughing. I don't know why I chose that music for any of the intro and break music, but after a while I sort of got into it, and I was kind of dancing here in my chair. So I hope everyone else enjoyed the music. Thank you again for everyone who is joining us now, and for those of you who've been with us this afternoon. We've had great conversations with panelists so far, as well as our plenary with Cindy Lindsay from the Community Foundations of Canada. And it's been great to take that national perspective here and learn from some local actors who are working in communities and doing that sort of on the ground work. So I'm hoping that we continue to have a great discussion. I know we will. And I will pass it over to Heidi, who's here with us today, who will be moderating our next and final panel.
Great, thanks very much, Brady, and welcome to everybody. If you're in Nova Scotia, there's a nice little heat wave going on. I'm sure everyone's having it across the way. So it probably hear a few fans in the background for those presenting today. I'd like to welcome everybody to looking at opportunities and challenges for the philanthropic sector pre and I don't know if we can call it post-19 yet. We're in the during. I don't know when post comes up, but we get the idea. We're hopefully on a path towards that. Myself, Brady just asked me to quickly introduce. I'm a assistant professor with Dalhousie University in the Rose School of Business, and I specifically work on leadership and change management. So I'll kind of keep it at that, but I do a lot of research with Shelley Price, who's actually one of the speakers today. We in the philanthropic sector, but specifically looking at Indigenous spaces and cultural safety and a lot of different wonderful areas. I'm going to first ask Daniel Holland, who's from the Community Foundations of Nova Scotia, to speak, and you'll have about 5 to 7 minutes. And I know that Brady is on the clock, so you'll see his hand wave when you have about 2 minutes left. And then we'll be joined by Shelley Price and then Harry Daley. And I'll introduce each one of you just quickly in between, and then we'll have some discussion at the end. So over to you, Daniel.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you, Brady. And thank you everyone for this opportunity to chat and share some thoughts. And I look forward to hearing from some of the other panelists in the discussion through the time that we have together. Opportunities and challenges, Heidi, I think you were right on it. Some that were pre-COVID or pre-pandemic before the middle of March of last year, some that are going on as a result. And I think when we look at some of the opportunities, there have been silver linings if you look for them in some of these tremendously challenging times. I'm going to focus on opportunities. We all know that it's been a challenging time for the sector, pretty much for every sector and all communities of all sizes and shapes. So I'm going to try and focus more on some of the opportunities that have come up over the last little while. By way of introduction, I'm going to refer to some things that predate myself. And the reason I say that is I am the CEO of the Community Foundation of Nova Scotia, as Heidi said. I joined just about a year ago, the middle of June of last year. So the pandemic was in its full throes already by that point in time. And some of the work that the Community Foundation had engaged in or has engaged in around some of these opportunities as a result of changing approaches and opportunities had already started. So I'm going to refer to some of those and just ask that you know that I'm referring to stuff that I wasn't actually a part of. I'm thrilled and honored to be a leader of the organization that was a part of it, but I wasn't involved in the organization at the time. I'm looking down towards the bottom of my screen. I know Emma's there. If we get any tricky questions about things that happened before me, I know Emma can come in and pitch hit for me. So what I will do is I'm going to look at 3 different stories or ideas, 3 different ways in which we've seen opportunities develop for the sector in terms of philanthropy, in terms of community foundations, and in terms of working across the not-for-profit and charitable space. They all have a theme. It's around collaboration and partnership, and it's around viewing things with a lens of abundance as opposed to scarcity. And I think our sector is known historically for, this is my territory, this is my donor, this is my relationship, or to work with a funder and say, we'd like you to come and do this with us, but over there might be something else. And before the pandemic, our organization had already started looking at things from a collaboration and partnering standpoint. And here are some examples of things that happened as a result and have continued. I'm going to refer first to the Nova Scotia Nonprofit COVID-19 Coalition. So that's a big mouthful. I'm not going to go into great details about it, but the coalition, as we endear it to be called now, was started within days, a couple of weeks or less of the lockdown in March of last year. And it involves representatives from a variety of different organizations across the sector, Black Business Initiative, Recreation, Sport Nova Scotia, iSands, Social Enterprise, United Way, Community Sector Council, and ourselves, amongst others. And really what that was is in response to work that was already being done in the private sector. No surprise, the chambers of commerce across the province said, let's work together, let's address our members, and let's start to try and help them through what will be a challenging time. This was a response to that. There was no money in it. There was no benefit. It was a time, dedication, resources, lots of work, and lots of collaboration for not an immediate, necessarily benefit, but it was an opportunity for partnership and for doing more for the sector. 22 open forums. Some of you may have participated in some or more than a few, were hosted between March and December, January of this year. Over 1,500 participants. I think the largest single was north of 250 participants. And they ranged in topics from early on, what is PPE and how do we get some? How do we open and close or close and then potentially reopen an office? Fundraising, mental health, caring for volunteers, all those kinds of things. So there's just an example of something that was done. It was work. It was across multiple actors and players, and it was not about specifically philanthropy, but part of what it did was enable greater philanthropy and partnership across the sector. My second example, a few of you on this Zoom today are familiar with the federal initiative from the federal government partnered with the Community Foundations of Canada called the Healthy Communities Initiative, or HCI. An idea came to be literally in the final hours and moments of December of 2020 and was launched in earnest in January. And they decided to break the country down into 22 hubs. I'm not going to get into how that happened or what the breakdown was, but let's just agree that 22 is not a number as Canadians that we're very familiar with when we're looking at breaking down the country and jurisdictions. The Atlantic Canadian hub was one. So 4 provinces, either side of 2 million, depending on how you're measuring our population, multiple linguistics, 2 exactly. So 2 point something, just under 2. There you go. Brady's saying 2. So that's why I'm never quite sure what our exact number is, but we're close.
2 minutes left, Daniel, not
2 minutes. I got to hurry up. Okay, 2 minutes, not 2 million. We worked with 6 community foundations as participant partners to come up with, and Brady helped us on this, how to approach it, how to break down a fund allocation of 31 million, of which 1.5 was allocated to Atlantic Canada across 4 provinces, a linguistic group, Ulnuwig First Nations participated. And this initiative was to reach those most acutely affected by the COVID, by the pandemic, and those would have been racialized organizations and those most affected. So this was an example, again, of partnership to enable philanthropy. And it's an example of what I think we're going to see more of going forward, which the CEO of CFC calls place-based philanthropy. So it's a program, it comes in and it works at a local level, and we end up partnering with others in a way that enables that distribution and disbursement to happen as equitably and with partnership as possible. The final one would be partnerships across corporate areas, community, and with funders, and it's to find new ways of enabling philanthropy. The corporate example, we could have a lot more information shared. Emma works very hard on this with Green Shield Canada. We were one of 6 early pilots. They've expanded that to 9 and now to 12, where they partner with the community foundation to reach their goals as opposed to being the on the grounds decision maker. They use local foundations and partners to achieve their goals in oral and mental health. We work with communities right across the province as well at a community level to identify their needs. And then the final one would be an example of working with a large funder donor to come up with a brand new initiative that we're going to pilot, I hope in the beginning of 2022 on a new social enterprise. So those are partnerships and collaboration.
Thanks so much, Daniel. And it was beautiful with the 2. That was a perfect timing for Brady to come into that to add a little humor to the day. I'm going to do the handoff to Shelley. You did a nice job of giving Shelley some. We just finished contributing to a book on place-based philanthropies. We wrote 2 chapters from an Indigenous context. So Shelley, I will hand it over to you. Shelley's from St. FX University, and I can personally speak that she's just one of the most fabulous people on the earth. So, that's what best friends say, right? There you go. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Heidi. Can you hear me? Yeah, awesome. Tili hai, Shelley Ovunga, Inuvunga Labradori Minute. So hello, everyone. My name is Shelley Price. I'm an Inuk woman. I was born in Labrador in the Nunatul region in Happy Valley. I'm wearing my orange, actually it's almost peach, shirt today, along with the trans colors, as it is Pride Month and it is Indigenous Heritage Month as well. And in honor of the children from Kamloops who have, whose graves have been found, I wanted to make sure that that was present in the space and also in my heart, mind, body, and spirit. Although I was born in Labrador, I have lived the vast majority of my life in Kipuktuk, Halifax, and Nimagi, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. I am an assistant professor, as Heidi mentioned, at St. Francis Xavier University, and I work in the Department of Management. I'm also part of the Indigenous and Atlantic hubs of PhiLab, actually doing some really wonderful work working with PhiLab, and I really enjoy it tremendously. So vast majority of my research is in Indigenous storytelling leadership and towards sustainable development, community well-being, and responsible management. I do come from the kind of the business side of academia, but I focus on values such as love and compassion and respect and gratitude towards building connections and supporting solidarity and standing up against or disrupting the systems of violence that sustain gender, race, and mental health-based biases in the workplace. I really love working with nonprofits, charities, and grassroots organizations and supporting them with interconnected approaches to leading change towards economic, social, cultural, environmental, and spiritual well-being of the local and global communities. When I do research on for-profit industry, I generally restore organizational practices to dream towards more compassionate responses to the calls for justice or calls to action and the calls for decolonizing business education. As Heidi mentioned, she and I have worked on two book chapters on the Gordon Foundation in the Arctic and looking at the various ways in which the Jane Glasgow Scholarship or Fellowship has supported environmental well-being initiatives throughout the Arctic by allowing the voices of the Arctic to be present within policy making. And something that really I'm quite passionate about is making sure that the voices from local communities are being heard in spaces where they have generally been marginalized. We've also worked on finished a chapter on the Clayoquot Sound as well, and really looking at the sacredness of space and place, the sacredness of the environment, and the spiritual presence of the land. Also working with Brady and Kelly and Sandra, who are all here as well, on a project where we're speaking with the Grand River Keepers and working with the Grand River Keeper Labrador Incorporated, was a grassroots organization, nonprofit organization, who protect and promote the well-being of the ecological area in Labrador, and working on hydroelectric impacts on the marine ecosystems and fisheries industry, and working in a community-based or community-led program with the Grand River Keepers. I also had a great pleasure of working with a group out of First Nations within what may be colonially called Quebec, but which of course are traditional territories of various nations within that colonial jurisdiction of Quebec, to write a book chapter, co-author a book chapter on restoring philanthropic landscape, and that's also going to be in a PhiLab book called philanthropy in Quebec. And so I've been really active working within the philanthropy sector, and especially working with PhiLab. And the last one that I'll just briefly talk about, we just wrapped up a really nice project, which actually ended up getting funding beyond the event funding that PhiLab sponsored us for, but working with BIPOC artists, so Black, Indigenous, and peoples of color artists within within Mi'kma'ki, working with the collective 2030 on restoring just futures, climate just futures, and through art. It was a wonderful project which culminated in, I'll actually post it within the chat, a wonderful website of art. It's a virtual curation of art with all of the artists looking to highlight their ideas through art on how we can restore climate just futures. So that's a little bit about me.
Great, thanks so much, Shelley. And I think lots of different questions that may come out of some of those wonderful projects. I'm going to move over to introduce Harry Daley, who is with the Greater St. John Community Foundation. And Harry, now all of your time to tell us about the wonderful things you're working on.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for the invite, Brady. My name, as mentioned, is Harry Daley. I work with the Greater St. John Community Foundation in New Brunswick. We're kind of a mid-sized foundation of about $20 million in our endowment. And we work with the urban St. John, as well as the kind of, it's about 75,000 people. Kind of the metro area, when you pull in the suburbs, brings it up to about $130,000. But we also work with a number of different rural communities. We have a pretty wide catchment area. So a number of different rural communities outside of that. St. John has a really rich history. It's one of the oldest, or it is the oldest incorporated city in Canada. But of course, for many millennia, about 12,000 years before this, this has been land that many people have lived on. St. John is right at the conflux of the Wolastoq River and the Bay of Fundy. And so the Wolastoq River, more commonly known as the St. John River. So this has been it's the unceded territory of the Wolastoq, but it's traditionally known as a meeting space between the Mi'kmaq, the Wolastoq, and also the Passamaquoddy, who occupy the upper reaches of the bay. So a lot of really rich history as a meeting place here. And I think that kind of feeds in. I've had a bit of a switch of what I was going to talk about, but we'll see how that fares for me here. I think when I think about the opportunities pre and post COVID, I think the things that really stand out to me are the importance of, as a foundation locally, is embracing complexity and really encouraging curiosity within the community that we work in. And what I mean by that is I was hired in February of 2020, so about a month before COVID. Really had no idea that was on our way, or the world that we would be living in less than a month after I was hired. But part of the reason that I was hired was to form this branch of the Community Foundation. So myself and my colleague, Carrie Tanasichuk, formed the Impact Measurement and Evaluation branch. And that was really in response to a need that the executive director saw in the community. We do a lot of small pilot funding. So we'll fund, $25,000 to $60,000 are most of our grants. And those are usually to try to prove some initiative. And then the hope is that they can then access some type of sustainability funding from whether that be a government funder or one of the larger foundations here. And what we saw is if that's really what we were hoping to do, a lot of those larger, like governments and larger foundations, were really looking for clear articulations of outputs and outcomes in the reporting that they were doing. And so we were hired to kind of build up the capacity, because what we were seeing is that there was a big push for that, but there wasn't really any support for organizations. Some of these are really small grassroots organizations. Those words are quite confusing and intimidating, and that quite often left them feeling disenfranchised, that they weren't doing a good job. And so when COVID hit, it really gave us the opportunity, Carrie and I as a new team, to stop and pause and think about, learn from each other, first of all, like get to know each other, tell stories about our histories, our understandings of evaluation, what worked well and what has not worked well. And from there, start to listen to the community and the organizations that we were going to be serving. So we were initially going to hit the ground running and really dive into it. This is what the board has said we needed to do. But what we started to see is that the outcome-based measurement, like the predetermined outcomes, people were really left feeling like that did not capture in any way the scope of the work, the nuance and the complexity of the communities that they were working in. And that quite often, when that's expected of them, they were left feeling like they weren't doing a good job. And what we started to see is that the impact that an organization is having and their ability to articulate it the way somebody else thinks they should are very different things. And so what we really tried to shift our focus to was how do we shift our reporting process, our application, our expectation away from that kind of predetermined accountability outcome, really focus in on learning and building up curiosity about what's happening. And I think that COVID-19 showcased that so much, because in February, when we did our Smart and Caring grants in February of 2020, any of the predetermined outcomes that people had thought that they should have a year from there, obviously, in most cases, those were out the window. And that wasn't just happening during COVID, that had been happening years before, but there was this expectation that if you do something, it will lead to this this behavior change and this outcome. And what we really started to see is that does not in any way, shape, or form capture the nuances of the work that the organizations that we were working with were doing. And so we've shifted our reporting process to really focus in on learning and storytelling. And what we encourage organizations to do is to really build up their capacity to be curious. So rather than thinking about, here's your activity, here's an intermediate outcome, and here's a long-term outcome, put something into motion and see what happens. And how can you look at, what things are impacting that? And rather than it being, a process that has a very definitive beginning and end, how do you constantly just watch and articulate what is happening so that you're learning and being curious? And what we found, and Shelley, I think just hearing you obviously know much more about this than I would, but what we've really tried to encourage is stories. Stories have been such an empowering tool for the organizations. It's language that resonates with them. It also resonates with the communities that they're working with and the participants. And so when we're talking about building capacity around impact measurement and evaluation now, what we're really been shifted towards over the past years, how do we build up the capacity of an organization to be curious, and then also create spaces for the people in the communities that they're working with to authentically share their stories? Because the nuances of the work that a lot of them are doing, especially in the social sector, it can't be captured. It can't always be captured the way that some of these bigger funders that are so far removed from these people think it should. So how do you create space for storytelling? And so we've shifted our reporting process, our application process. A lot of it can be done in person. They get to choose the stories or the questions that they report on, and they also get to choose the medium in which they want to report, because what we found was that our reporting structure pre-COVID was not very robust. And I think that was a good thing, because quite often we weren't even using that information for much of anything. So, why we need these big, robust metrics in place when we weren't using them for anything. And so we've shifted to allow the organizations to decide what questions they want to answer and how they want to answer those. And quite often that is through stories. So I think that's kind of the biggest shift for us, is that we thought that there might be some semblance of control and how we could help people just understand outputs and outcomes, and that they would be much better equipped to articulate that. And what we found now is that as an organization, we're really trying to embrace complexity and also encourage curiosity through storytelling.
Thanks very much, Harry, and appreciate all the different comments from Daniel and Shelley and Harry. And so just going to sort of throw out a question for you. You speak the magic words to me, being a leadership and change specialist. when you start to use things like storytelling and curiosity and looking at the voice of the people going and sharing the experience. There's a tremendous amount of research that speaks to about, 80, 90% of change failing. Yet we've become masters of change in a very short period of time. So I would look to, I may start with Daniel, just to kind of go back, just looping around, and what are the things that you have found that have been the most important about the different worldviews, the different perspectives that have helped you to navigate, even joining your job back in June, right? You're joining in the middle of it all. How have those different worldviews helped you to navigate the change as a leader?
So you framed the question after talking about storytelling and voice and the challenges of change initiatives, or we're all trying to adapt into a different way of operating. I'm currently attached to the word reset as opposed to anything about normal, because it's not, but wherever we're going in this next phase, some months or at some point in the next couple of years. I think that as I reflect on the things that were most important to me, leading in this time, it's that we don't have all the answers, that I'm not the one who has most of the knowledge, and that I go back to one of the earliest things I said as I was beginning to introduce my ideas around partnership, is that I do think that conversations, outcomes, and relationships get richer and deeper with an abundance mentality as opposed to a scarcity mentality. So if we go in with a view that by having more conversation, by deepening relationships or expanding the number of relationships we have across community foundations, across into the sector that we serve, with our donors, bridging relationships between our donors and the good work that's done within the sector, then that's bringing diversity of view, that's bringing different relationships. I think the Healthy Communities Initiative would be telling, in that I don't think many community foundations, at least in our part of the world, maybe some would say right across Canada, and Shelley, I think you would have direct experience in this, would have knowledge, would have conversations that they could refer back to, where they could get perspective and view of those communities that were most acutely affected by the pandemic. And those would be the variety of BIPOC communities in certain areas. It might be some of the elderly who were shut in, but let's be clear, the majority were racialized communities. And so I think that one of the lessons of leadership is to create points of conversation for relationship and to listen and to understand. And it took me, as a man of certainly the white privilege I've experienced, time to get comfortable in that. As long as I am leaning into that and having conversation, I'm going to learn, and the rich relationship will lead to greater outcomes for all of those that are a part of the conversation. But I go back to, I don't know, so the conversation is going to get better. The outcomes are going to get better by having more people and having a view that more information, more voice at the table and involved in the relationship in philanthropy is going to create greater impact, and hopefully impact that's more sustainable.
Thanks so much, Daniel. And I'm going to sort of lean over to Shelley right now to see what you'd want to contribute to that before I go over to Harry.
Thanks everyone. When we talk about perspectives, I think that there's nothing better than multiple perspectives. And even if that is micro change, when we look at even the smallest of changes, when we gather together in collectives and organically work with one another to gather various perspectives, to think of have new ideas filter around. My dissertation work was in storytelling leadership, but really focusing in on collective and affective forms of leadership. And so looking at the diversity of perspectives and the solidarity amongst peoples, and standing up together is a really powerful process, and especially when the stories infuse our connections to the lands, or our connections to peoples and to the spirit world, etc. So those really help to move us and to drive us and to fill our hearts with warmth, so that we can take on the hard work that we face. And I in my dissertation work, I called it an uncomfortable, long loving, deeply contemplative, multisensory experience, because this really experiencing diverse perspectives through this multisensory and or embodied process of really deeply connecting your heart while contemplating on how do I get into that same space with another person, standing with, equal to another human being and or to the lands, and really feel the depth of the hurt or harm or the injustice or the violence that they have experienced is very uncomfortable, but we can do those things quite often in a compassionate way towards ourselves when our hearts, minds, bodies, and spirits are ready for taking in these knowledges. But it is a process, and being uncomfortable sometimes, and I think that Robin DiAngelo said, sometimes we have to be uncomfortable to make changes in race-based, gender-based, mental health-based changes that are really truly needed in this world. And it does take multiple perspectives, being able to hear directly from those who are most harmed in the situation. So that basically is how I want us to lead into the future, is really becoming more comfortable with what is uncomfortable, and finding ways to compassionately engage with persons who are the most harmed, and those who are most deeply connected to the voiceless, the lands, the trees, or those who are most attuned to the voices of those whom we believe, like the lands that we traditionally see as voiceless, but those who are attuned to the voices of the lands in order to be able to make changes. So those are just a couple of words from me.
Well, thanks so much, Shelley. And for some, DiAngelo's work on white fragility is just a beautiful book to read and get more comfortable. Having the benefit for myself of my other half and my kids being Mi'kmaq gives me a view into some spaces that some don't have. But it's a really great book to get more comfortable. And I want to come back to Harry, because you actually started this thought process that I was going through, because you embraced the words curiosity and learning. So really interested in your perspective of sort of those worldviews.
Yeah, I mean, first, thanks everybody. That's Daniel and Shelley for your perspective. It's such so great to hear from both of you and your perspectives on that. Yeah, I think the first thing that came to mind for me was something that I heard as a result of my interaction with the Canada Healthy Communities Initiatives and Emma and Daniel at CFNS, and it's I think it was from Jay Pitter, but it was focused on the fact that people are inherently powerful. People have power. We don't need to necessarily empower them, but there's a number of systems that trick us into thinking that either we do not have power or that we do have, an exceptional amount of power. And so I think something that we've seen here locally in St. John is that the business community has really shaped the way that the nonprofit sector is informed and driven. And so, there's a poverty reduction is a big thing in St. John. There is a lot of poverty. And so I think that there's this thought that if you know about money, you understand poverty, and that has certainly not necessarily been the case that we've seen. And so it's to kind of circle back to the question, creating opportunity. I think that as a community foundation, how do we create space for people to recognize their power, and then us be guided by that, to listen to it, that the funders should not, you know, it's a facade that we have more power somehow than individuals and communities. And so how can we create space to hear, listen, and adapt to that, rather than kind of have this is our strategic priorities that we're moving towards. And, you know, I think that we've as an organization started to be driven more by principles, more so than strategic goals. So what are the underlying ways of being that we want to be as an organization? And then how can we, you know, how can we judge ourselves on that rather than our particular targets and outcomes? And I think in terms of perspectives, it's just creating space for people to feel comfortable, because there is a power dynamic that does exist between the funders. So it's one thing for me to say these things, it's a totally different thing for somebody to believe me, or how, you know, how do we nurture that relationship? How do we build that up over time? And it hasn't been perfect, and it won't be. And that's, I think, the nature of it. But I think that we're trying, and we're learning. And Daniel, it looks like you wanted to potentially hop in on there, so I'll pass it to you.
Heidi, can I just jump on two things that have been said that came to me last week that I think speak to leadership, but also speak to the context of what we're talking about in the changing nature, finally, of some parts of philanthropy, and hopefully it will continue to be that way. The Community Foundations of Canada hosted their biannual conference last week for 3 days. It was a great example, given the events or the discovery of the burial sites of in Kamloops, really leading into some very important and resonant conversations from leaders from across the country at a time when there was a big shift, a call and a call to action to lean into and to be differently in these conversations. So both Harry and Shelley have referred to something in terms of that power dynamic and that change. And it came through in a conversation. Emma, you might be able to throw it into the chat for me, about trust-based philanthropy. And it's something that I was not really familiar with in understanding, but it is that shift that Harry's talking about the power dynamic, and about encouraging donors having conversations right up front and saying, you know, if you're so caught up in what Harry's been describing as the reporting and the meeting measurement targets and everything else, you're losing so much of that rich opportunity of conversation in the relationship. And instead, let's say if that's the way you wish to give, then maybe we're not your partner. And move to a conversation about trust in relationship, whether it be multi-year or some significant amount of funding that says, we will reach outcomes and we will let you know about, maybe it's through storytelling, what those outcomes are, but it's a different kind of relationship, and it's based on trust and not on power. And so two separate pieces, but it really came to light for me only last week in a separate panel that I was listening to, not participating in. And thanks, Emma, for doing that and throwing that into the chat.
Thanks so much, Daniel. And I asked Brady if I can ask one more question just to sort of infuse. I mean, so the shameless plug for my own specialty area, which is contagious resilient leadership. And you're all speaking to so many of the pieces that I'm so grateful, because it's all about the ripple effect of change. I guess the question I would love to ask is, COVID has presented us with so many challenges. And as you've done, you've talked about abundance and seeing things through the lens of positivity, which is where I spend most of my time. Who was the surprise that came out to support you during COVID, in terms of being an organization that you never expected them to be able to do that? Who was that surprise who came out of the gates and really got behind you? And by the way, that is a pivotal component of change, is having great supporters. But it's when they surprise you that it's really even, that's what I'm noticing a lot more of the storytelling is about during COVID. So I'm going to go back to Harry for a minute.
Yeah, so I mean, depending on who you ask in our organization, you probably get a different answer, because our executive director would be looking at it from a different perspective than me. But I think, so a bit of background. So the IME branch that I work with, we actually are not funded through our operation budget. So our operation budget is about 3% of our endowment. We're set up in a way that we actually have to generate revenue to cover our expenses. So we're here to build capacity, and we really had no idea what this year was going to look like. So we had our target set in February of 2020, and then it was like, oh man, there's no way we're going to be able to generate money in this climate. And so I think who's supported us, and it's been surprising and just fills me up with so much gratitude, is the organizations that we've traditionally supported. So it's the people that we give money to that have really stepped up and are, they're trusting us, they're working with us, they're changing their understanding of how our relationship can be. So I think that the community organizations have allowed us to become what we are, and we would not be able to do it without their support, their trust and the access to support from us. But they've also invested financially into us, when traditionally we're known as someone that gives you money, right? And so that's a real shift in mindset from, here is money, but also we need money too. So it's been really incredible to see that, and it's built up relationships with organizations. It comes, there's a lot of things that come into question and conflicts. If we give somebody money and they're giving us money, does that enhance their chances of getting money in the future? So there's no question that there's a number of different questions that have come up from that. But all in all, there's no question that it has enhanced the relationship that we have with the organizations that we work with, and as a result of their trust in us, we've been able to adapt and change to hopefully meet their needs and support them.
What a beautiful story of shared relationship, right? Shared leadership, even in terms of when you step back and you're a follower, next time you're the leader. It's just a beautiful dance. So Shelley will know that I'm going to go to Daniel first on this one. She knows why I'm doing this. So I'll come over to Daniel for your thoughts.
Okay. I was struggling with the surprise piece because am I surprised? In one sense, no. In another sense, I don't take it for granted. What has come to us, again, an era of change pre-COVID, our organization going through a different mindset at the board level, making a determination that we wish to create collaborative relationships, that we wish to step out of a traditional role as only an endowment or fund holder, if you will, and waiting for these asks and then going and dispersing. Part of that was engaging someone like me who has a relationship across or seeks relationships across the province and in many different sectors. The next piece was in seeking new board members to come to us. So an all white and privileged board, and that took some time and some work. And so the surprise is not entirely surprising. It's just with gratitude that the answer was yes from at least a few new board members, and we continue to expand. From people who would say, am I willing to join an organization where there might be a preconceived set of notions about what this organization is and where it comes from and how it approaches, and be willing to come in and say, if you're willing to have my voice heard and you're willing to engage in some conversations, as someone said to me who joined our board recently from a diverse background, a BIPOC community, I'm not known for being quiet, and is that going to be okay? And it was like, yes, in fact, that's what we're looking for. So we're really pleased. So that was not surprising, but still it took some time and a variety of different conversations, and we continue to seek that. I'm going to mention one more, which is you just never know when these things are going to come, and it's not COVID, but in seeding relationships. So our board worked over the last number of years, our organization is 12 years old, of letting folks in the world where philanthropy matters at the time of wills and estates know about our organization, what we do. And anonymously, a very significant fund came to us in January. It had nothing to do with COVID, but it had to do with the passing eventually of somebody who lived a very long and full life, and had made a decision to give anonymously to our foundation with a very open, somewhat specific, but a very open endowment to help around health initiatives, about health and well-being initiatives in a certain part of Nova Scotia, but not too narrow, wide enough with an opportunity to expand that right across. So we we'll wait until the end of the year when we seek some input and hopefully applications in Harry's sense that are not cumbersome, but they're about telling a story for that fund and those returns and disbursements that we can begin to do that. So that's an example that's not COVID specific, but you just never know when having those relationships and letting people know that you're here to do good work, when somebody will decide, yes, I'm going to do that. And it's after they've gone and they've made it very explicit in a completely anonymous way. And it's a game-changing gift for our foundation, and to be able to share that story amongst many others who may wish to do the same at some future time when we can never predict it.
Thanks, Daniel. And I'll just close with going to Shelley and then turn it back over to Brady. But I think that this is one of the biggest things that being a change researcher, and we're doing a lot of kindness research around the world right now. And one of the biggest things that we're finding is what we could call them surprises, or just people or stakeholders that hadn't traditionally been a part of the fabric, who suddenly become a very large piece of the fabric, who come through COVID as an opportunity to really shift things. So I'll turn it to Shelley because of her research in the projects to see who might have surprised you or what might have surprised you along the way, and then over to Brady.
I won't take very long, actually, because where I don't actually work directly with an organization, really, I have a limited scope of understanding here. So I'm going to speak just generally from the position that I hold as a board of directors on the Atitihai Inuit community group. And one of the, and for those who don't know me, what I'm about to say, and giving kudos to what I'm about to give kudos to, is going to be a big shock. The big surprise for me was how much government support was out there, and that there were so many opportunities to access funding in places and spaces, and for health and well-being, and especially mental health and well-being, where I haven't seen those in the past. And we're very limited in how much support we get for mental health. I think it's horrendous how little support there is on a national scale for health and well-being, and through suicide awareness. And I think it's abhorrent how little we have, but it was a surprise to me at the vast amount of government support that there was for these particular areas.
Thanks so much, Shelley. So Brady, over to you.
Awesome. And I think it's an amazing conversation, and really, again, thank you to the panelists and to Heidi for the great moderation there. And I want to switch the conversation in a minute to really thinking about those key directions for the future. And us at PhiLab, we have some of our research members on the line, and we really are interested in hearing from those in the sector, with the panelists that are online, as well as those who've spoken already, and others can speak, and really to get an idea of where some of those action items and some of those action pieces that, as a research partnership organization, we can actually start driving that in the sector. But first, I want to just pass the mic over quickly to someone who's been on the call with us all afternoon and has been enjoying the conversation. And I'd like Jane to share briefly. We're talking about innovation a lot, and these sort of different models and perspectives and voices. And Jane comes to the sector with a very interesting approach. So Jane, if you wanted to just say a few words briefly.
Oh, thanks, Brady. I appreciate it. It's been a really interesting afternoon. My name is Jane Nicholson, and I'm the founder and CEO of Arrow, Annapolis Investments in Rural Opportunity. And some people call me a philanthropreneur. I basically have trust-based philanthropy at the bottom of my money, which I utilize to create jobs in Annapolis Royal in Annapolis County. So we're 5 years old on June the 1st, and a couple of friends here on the movie screen who know me well. But if you want to know more about Arrow, it's ruralopportunity.com, and I'd be happy to talk to you all about it. But basically, so far I've invested $692,000 in community funds to small entrepreneurs. 155 applications, 67 businesses founded, almost 200 jobs created, some full-time, some part-time, and 19 community projects granted to. In that, 86 people that we have lent or donated money to, I have had one default on my loan. So I'm thinking of Joan and what she was talking about community knowledge, because Arrow is very simple and very nimble, and it is a private company because of the CRA regulations that currently deal with philanthropy. So I had to find a way to give my money away that wasn't going to get me in kind of financial hoops. And our whole thing is community knowledge. And that's why I talk about trust-based philanthropy, because I only lend to people in my town or my county, people that I know, that I not know personally perhaps, but have that sense of community. So that passion for Annapolis Royal and the county and that community knowledge compared with money, you do have to have all three of those things. You absolutely have to. And the reason that I only have one default in 86 grants and loans is because people trust me to, they don't want to not pay us back at Arrow, because we don't just lend money over 24 months at 3% non-cumulative interest rate. We mentor our people over the length of the loan. So we are with them from beginning to the end of their loan payments. It's very simple. Our applications are on our website for a new business and for an existing business. There's a wonderful little 7-minute video you might want to look at, because I can never explain to people how simple and nimble this project is. But it's jane@ruralopportunity.com, and I have to go now and take care of my mother. So I just want to say thank you so much. I've really enjoyed the call, and I'm really happy that Cindy Lindsay was talking about ways to put more of community foundation funds into our country. So thanks, folks. Thanks, Brady. I appreciate you. Bye now.
Thank you so much, Jane.
Bye.
I wanted to invite Jane to speak just because we had talked about so many of these themes around the flexibility of organizations in rural areas, and she said the nimbleness, being very nimble in that, the simplicity. I mean, talking about some of the issues around being buried in paperwork versus some of the work that's happening, and the organizations doing that homework for them, and really making sure that the organizations that are doing the work can do the work and not get buried in that paperwork. So it's an interesting model, I think, that Jane is very open to talking about, and she's had a lot of success with that. I think there are barriers in every model that we look at, but it's certainly an interesting perspective to get as we go forward. So before I ask anyone else for any questions, I wanted to just do a quick share of some of the key themes that had come out of yesterday and today. So we looked at yesterday, really focused around the climate crisis and environmental funding. So the urgency of the climate crisis being top of the list. Obviously, as the urgency increases, funding should increase, and recentering community priorities, capacity, cultural shift needed to support the environmental sector, collaboration. A lot of these things that actually translated to the second day, which was today, looking at connections to global issues. Cindy Lindsay talked about SDGs, vital signs, being embedded in communities, and again, doing that homework. So it's these larger organizations that are taking on the brunt of that, so that things like the CRA guidelines and reporting and applications aren't so convoluted and very difficult to get funds. It's really about doing that good work in a simple, nimble way, which I like Jane's wording there. And really about that innovation piece was huge today. We learned a lot about different initiatives that are happening that are a bit innovative. And then, of course, multiple perspectives and voices being empowered, through storytelling and other ways that folks on the call have been really bolstering those voices and perspectives in their work. And so with that, I'd like to sort of switch gears a bit and think about some of the future directions or action items, and actually bring the conversation back to the panelists also, but to everyone else that's on the call, and to get an idea of where you see PhiLab as a research partnership organization, evidence-based sort of approaches, looking at this idea of maximizing impact in the sector, how we can, thinking about some of the future directions for those, say, 4 players in the sector, looking at grant-making organizations, grant-receiving organizations, non-charitable status organizations, and researchers, us here at PhiLab. If anyone has any ideas or things that came out of the conversation today, or in their own ideas, where we can really draw on for our work at PhiLab going forward, and to make sure that we meet the needs of those in the community, and that we're listening to, sort of reading the room, if you would, of how we can move forward. And I'm actually going to take notes during this, so I'm going to minimize that so I can actually take notes here, but I think you can still see the screen.
So Brady, I have something. I don't know if you're taking from everybody in the room at this point.
Yep, it's open to anyone to add.
Yeah, I think really what I would love to see PhiLab do is really start to explore, some of what I had referred to as these cross-sectorial relationships, because that there is so much interrelationship in a society between these different actors. And I think it's easy for any one group to know only about, sort of the motivators of their own group. But I'd like to see that as wide as possible, businesses, universities, organizations, individuals and communities, and just sort of how all those relationships can really benefit each other and sort of maximize each other.
So what I've done, and I think one of the topics there really is intersectionality, which we've talked about yesterday and today, and then looking at that quadruple helix, which for those who might not know, it's sort of a framework for looking at how, maybe probably won't explain this very well, but it's basically all the actors that work in sort of a development framework, like universities, civil society, government, and there is a fourth one. Communities, I think, is the quadruple piece. And really, I agree, like thinking about how these relationships intermingle and work together, and the motivators behind them, and thinking cross-sectionally, whether it's, environmental philanthropy or health foundations or social justice organizations, and how they all work really essentially in the same space, but yet, and we heard this yesterday, there's a bit of a siloing where, in the environmental movement, for example, environmental philanthropy has traditionally, and environmental NGOs sometimes focus on just the environment, versus recognizing the environment as a larger issue with very intersectional pieces. So I certainly agree with that. Any other thoughts?
I wonder, Kelly here, my video's on. There's been a lot of discussion about changing the relationship between communities and grant recipients and funding agencies. So maybe some case studies of examples of, I'd be interested to know what other people think, but of that more collaborative relationship between funders and recipients, and also maybe support on the theme of innovation, how you identify these kind of groundbreaking projects that have the potential to make major change and seed and support those early initiatives. That was the other idea that came up. So maybe there can be some case studies around that, or I'm not sure how you support those kind of really, there was a theme that we need major change on climate change, for example, we need action and need it fast. So we should be, the grant making organizations can maybe seed early, really maybe higher risk innovative projects to make governments more comfortable perhaps with supporting those initiatives after they have some legs under them. But I'm not sure how, how we can advance those things other than maybe looking for case study examples and telling those stories, back to the storytelling.
Harry, I wonder, sorry, just to jump in quickly. I know, Harry, you do some of this work around impact and evaluation and working with other organizations. Is there a role you think that PhiLab as a research network can sort of employ some of those strategies or take some of the lessons you've learned or learn from some of the work you're doing in our work as well?
Yeah, I mean, admittedly, it's been just about a year now that we've been doing this work, and it's been kind of emergent in a lot of ways. Like it's not set in stone the way that we do things. We always kind of say we're just making it up as we go in a lot of ways. But I think so. So with that said, in what capacity? I think that something that I have to admit is that we're able to work in a way that supports the communities and the organizations that we work with, but there's still not a ton of appetite for it at the government level and some of the other funders. So it's a bit like we get people excited about evaluation and impact and curiosity, but then they're still kind of met with the same doors. So this is one small community foundation that is doing this, but I don't know in what capacity, but how to shift the way that some of these larger systems and organizations do things, because the reality is, a change has happened in an individual and in an organization, but when they step out the door, that change doesn't necessarily happen in the broader community. So I don't know if PhiLab has any ability to kind of look at that, explore that, but it's certainly a reality of the situation.
Daniel, I think you had unmuted there for a second before I followed up.
Yeah, and I'm not sure where in your categorization of grant making, grant receiving, and researchers this falls. It might be something, and it's global in its nature, so it's beyond PhiLab Atlantic. It was discussed again last week, but I'm just listening to Harry. I'm listening to how do we facilitate, what role is there for an independent research group? There's a need to make grant applications simpler. There's a need for grant making organizations to buy into that process. So is there research that could be done with empirical, at least statistically proven, to show that, and I'm going to pick a number here, at the core, both grant makers and grant recipients or applicants would agree that these 20 questions, I don't know if the number is 20, but these 20 questions are core to telling the story about applying for a grant. And that it was discussed last week, and this is where I'm trying to figure out at what intersection of the different participants that you list on your slide, is it possible for that agreement to take place, or for a hypothesis of what that agreement, to then try and encourage as many to have a common system for applications that would save applicants time by being able to use the same core, knowing that maybe 20% of each application has to be unique to the organization. So the only part you're reinventing, if the questions are similar and the answers can be similar based on the organization filling it in once, there can then be consistency, less energy, less effort, more consistency, more about storytelling. I don't know. It's just an idea. I don't know where it fits, if it's something researchers can do by asking participants at both sides the right questions.
Mm-hmm.
But it did come up last week, and I was reminded of it again in one of the parts of the panel discussion today.
I wonder if it's interesting, and I sort of put in there as well. I heard someone mention earlier, I forget who, but this sort of funding purpose, not project. So thinking about when you look at funding, it's not about every project you have to reapply, but that as an organization or an initiative, we have this purpose, and then funders give to, say, that purpose or that mission.
Yeah.
So I think it comes down, really, as a project, for example, it would be interesting to see some sort of as researchers, I think it would be interesting to even have an organization or a community foundation or someone who is willing to even put in that the potential of that. If there's a funding cycle that comes out and say they go with that model and then do some sort of evaluation on whether or not how effective that model was, or what was the challenges, or what were the benefits. So I think it sort of is both there between the grant making organizations and researchers to do that collaboratively.
Yeah, there would have to be a fair amount of lobbying to influence enough of the grant making organizations to agree to a core element. But where you're going, and I don't know how it is, it was research that I did a year ago, but McConnell had already moved to a mode of from proving something to deciding to partner in improving a cause or an outcome. So it was less about the measurement and more about, is this known to be something that's improving the, again, desired outcomes that they're funding as opposed to a specific piece. But it's a lobbying effort as well. But if you went into the lobbying with a statistically developed set of questions that most would agree with, you might stand a better chance.
Any other thoughts, Susan? I think I see you.
Yeah, sorry, and I don't want to monopolize, but it's right there on the screen, and it's huge, and it's been mentioned so many times in this meeting and in all the other meetings I've attended recently, which is the non-charitable status organizations, because I'm just encountering this now. You know, what everybody said about who the actors are, how they relate with official charities, who's doing the work. That's an enormous issue. And for something like a community foundation, I think it's really clear we don't know how to deal with that because there's these regulations about who you can actually give grant money to. So I would love to see, you know, any help from the PhiLab or PhiLab that they possibly could about how foundations and funders can sort of start to approach this in a way that's equitable and just, because the reality is it's not what needs to be happening. And I think, you know, for people who are relatively new in this field, it's just becoming more and more clear, and you're hearing it everywhere, that there has to be a way to get some money to some of these non-charitable status organizations and people.
What's interesting is that the conversation that I've had with, and I've met with, you know, Daniel and Harry and others in PEI and other parts of the region, and that is a huge, you know, elephant in the room is this charitable status piece that organizations have to give to, you know, qualified donees, and there is this requirement. But yet organizations have consistently, as soon as they say that, they say, but we work around that, or we do this differently, or we, you know, pair organizations with charities. And so there is this interesting dynamic where there is some workarounds, but so it's again, I don't know if it's, you know, lobbying or however, you know, we can show that there's, you know, this is already happening. Why is this a barrier as opposed to seeing that there are opportunities?
I can think of a couple of workarounds, but what I would really love to see happening is some actual systemic.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. Any other thoughts? I don't want to keep everyone too long, but I love this conversation, and I think it's great to really get some key insights here for future directions. Oh, and I see Devika just popped in, so maybe she'll have a few thoughts as well. But it's been great, and I think for PhiLab itself, we're really excited to continue growing our partnerships, and, you know, seeing people on the call who I know and who we've been working with has been great. Hi, Devika, I just see you just joined us. We're just doing our little wrap up here and just sharing some of our key insights on the top right. There was a lot of overlap from today and yesterday. So just looking at some future directions and action items for us at PhiLab. But great to have you here.
Thanks. Sorry I'm late, and please go ahead.
All good. So we've just been chatting a bit about some of our key directions, and some of the things that were mentioned is really about the collaboration, the innovation, working around things like charitable status, intersectionality, cross-sectoral relationships, and I'm open to any other ideas or thoughts that people may have on the call. Daniel, I see you unmuted.
Yeah, I've just come off. Emma's so much faster at getting the web links than I am, and it's something, Susan, your comment is a daily struggle for all of us, I think, in community foundations who want to move money to those who are doing the good work. And quite often those are smaller organizations who don't have the charitable status. Know that CFC, Cindy would have been able to speak to this earlier today, are a part of a group that lobbies almost incessantly to the federal government for changes to this. There was a fantastic post by about 30 charitable tax lawyers saying now is the time to move the qualified donee conversation forward, especially because of COVID. And the workaround that's being referred to is in there in one way, in that you find a partnering organization. It's not ideal, it's not systemic, it's not a solution to the long term, but it is the way a lot of the organizations that our donors wish to grant to who can't receive, we seek that they find partners in the ways that CRA is allowing it today. I won't say that it's possible 100% of the time, but a vast majority, if the relationships are sought, and we were talking earlier about the value of relationships, you can develop it. It might not happen on the first call, but if the trust is developed with another charitable organization that the group is going to do the good work, it is possible. So thanks, Emma, for throwing that up a little bit faster than my technology skills would have been able to. Brady, just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention about the chat.
Any other thoughts or ideas going forward? Yes, Doug.
Yeah, great. I apologize. I'm sitting outside and the truck just decided to back up in my neighbor's driveway here.
No worries.
But I guess it's a bit timely that Devika is back on, because I was going to reference, I think it was Devika yesterday that mentioned in the report that she discussed that we really don't have a very good count on how much philanthropy comes into, leaves, and flows around the region. So I'm wondering from the practitioners in the room, how much desire is there, or the need there is there to do some more of that baseline approach to things, of just getting a sense of how big is this sector, how much is coming in, how much is going out. And I see that as important on different scales, both at the sort of the community level scale of how much are people donating to charitable organizations, and how much charitable money is flowing back into that community. And, you know, I sort of, when we joined this project, I had this question in the back of my head: is Atlantic Canada a net source or a net recipient of charitable or donations? And I'm no clearer on that one myself at this point.
I think that's a great point, and I want to bring up a point that David got, sorry to keep putting you on the spot. I know you're probably just here to listen, but you mentioned yesterday in your speech about or your talk, and I have it in my notes here somewhere, but it was something like, you know, if there was some sort of metric around, and it was about environmental giving and sort of measuring that, and it was like if we had a number of hectares that had been conserved through philanthropic dollars, or if we had these ways to measure the impact that, at a larger scale, maybe at a regional scale, dollars, translating to things like conservation or equity or these other larger issues. I think that, is an interesting concept to start thinking about. What is the baseline? What is, where are we starting from? And I say starting, but obviously we're well into the game already. So, as we try to adjust or reset, as Daniel said, post COVID-19, or as we think about post COVID-19, which we're not there yet, but hopefully the light might be at the end of the tunnel. But how that really impacts the ways that we approach doing philanthropy, or thinking about philanthropy as researchers.
Yeah, can I just quickly respond to that?
Please do, yes.
To both. On the data piece, as I said, our organization looked at that through Jamie Gamble's work in 2015. I don't know what the number is in 2021, but I'm going to guess it's still very, very low, right? I'm not sure. I mean, there are a lot of sort of data priorities. I'm not sure that knowing that it's low again is going to help us much versus focusing on what we need to do to increase it. And I think that kind of leads into the second point, Brady, that you're mentioning. Like, if we wanted to talk about sort of a bigger story for the region and what needles we're trying to move, it could be needles around, green jobs that we're trying to bring to the region, or land restoration, increasing that. Like, if there was tracking around those numbers, and allowing all of the community organizations who do that work to feed into those numbers, then that could be an important storytelling and fundraising tool to attract more philanthropy into the region from, say, EFC members that don't currently fund in the region but have an interest in it, or other types of donors that haven't been tapped, like the wealthy retirees who have moved there, or US funders who care about conservation. So yeah, that's sort of the link I see between both the data point and the need for the metrics.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So are there any other thoughts, and I don't want to keep belaboring the point, so we won't keep going if there isn't any more, but I think we've gotten some great feedback and interests thus far, but if I see none, I may just pass it over to Kelly if you're.
Sounds good. Thanks everyone for all those thoughts. And if you wake up in the middle of the night or have a thought over the next few days about some other burning ideas, please do reach out to us. And the PhiLab email address is here, which will reach Brady or Sandra in the near future. And we'll certainly be happy to get back to you and include any ideas in the final report. So just a big thank you to everyone again who participated and shared your thoughts, and our speakers, to the Rural Community Foundation of Nova Scotia for partnering with us on this. And we really hope that relationship will continue and we can pursue some of these ideas together, to PhiLab and SHRC, the Social Science Humanities Research Council, who funds the PhiLab, along with other partners, and Charity Village, who contributed to the series of regional PhiLab conferences that have been going on over the last month or so. And I think the Western one is coming up at the end of the week. Is it, Brady? If anyone's interested in taking that in as well. So yeah, we just wanted to end with a big thanks, and to reiterate that this is just a step in the ongoing process of building our collaborations and networks. So we do hope that you'll get in touch or respond when we get in touch with you, asking sort of where we go next and how we can continue the conversation. I know Devika and Brady and I were talking about the desire to get together in person. So when we can, maybe there'll be a follow-up event we can have in a couple of years where we can all gather in person and continue to discuss these ideas and where we've come, hopefully far 2 years from now. I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks again. And as Kelly said, we will certainly be in touch. So this won't be the last time you hear from us. So if there's any other thoughts or ideas or directions for the future, then feel free to let us know. And we're looking forward to collaborating on initiatives in the future.